Imagine staring at a spreadsheet. Right. And this spreadsheet can map out exactly when your heart rate is going to spike to, like, 160 beats per minute over the course of the next 300 pages.
Which sounds insane.
It does. But you aren't looking at a medical chart, and you aren't looking at a fitness tracker. You are looking at the literal data-driven blueprint of a novel.
Yeah.
Because, we usually think of picking a book as this purely subjective emotional process. You look at the cover, maybe you skim a few reviews, you see if the blurb promises the kind of escape you are looking for today.
It feels like an art, right? I mean, it's a gut feeling based on marketing and your mood. But when you subject a piece of literature to rigorous quantitative analysis...
Which is exactly what we're looking at today.
Exactly. You stop looking at it as just a story. You start seeing the structural engineering holding the narrative together. You can literally track how an author is manipulating the reader's physiology, like chapter by chapter.
It's wild. So, welcome to today's deep dive. We have something entirely fascinating on the table for you today. Our source material isn't just a book. We are unpacking this highly detailed, incredibly granular literary metrics report and critical analysis of a novel called The Man Who Vanished by Ghassan Jawhar.
And it is granular.
Oh, extremely. And the mission for our deep dive today isn't just to give you a standard book club review. We are going to deconstruct how an author successfully engineered a 9.6 out of 10 originality score.
Which is almost unheard of in this genre.
Right, and he does it by smashing together high-stakes geopolitical thrills with a deep-sinking philosophical dread. So we're exploring what the data actually tells us about how suspense works and what happens when you give a perfectly normal, flawed human being the ultimate power of invisibility.
The metrics in this report, I mean, they reveal a deeply calculated literary architecture.
Yeah.
We're talking about quantitative analysis of tension, minute breakdowns of genre percentages, thematic density tracking.
Yeah.
It is a masterclass in how to build a narrative that just completely refuses to stay in one lane.
So let's start with that mathematical DNA because the numbers here are just wild. Like, wait, they actually calculated the percentage of suspense in a domestic drama chapter?
They absolutely did.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
According to the data, the novel averages 66.8% suspense overall. But it features 6 specific peak chapters. So that's chapters 10, 12, 15, 17, 19, and 23 that rocket up to 90% suspense or higher.
And the genre breakdown is just as fragmented as those peaks. You've got a core of 28% psychological thriller and 22% political thriller.
Right.
But then you also have 12% domestic drama and 5% survival realism just mixed right in.
Which sounds like a mess on paper, but
those percentages tell a really compelling story when you compare them to the benchmark work cited in the report. Like the analysts measure Jawhar's infiltration sequences against Frederick Forsyth's The Day of the Jackal.
Oh,
right, which is famous for sustaining this relentless 98% procedural tension. But Jawhar doesn't hold that note.
No, he doesn't.
His novel will intentionally drop from those massive Forsyth-level peaks all the way down to the 45% suspense range. And the analysts compare those valleys to the quiet sort of existential reflection you find in Kafka's The Metamorphosis.
Okay, but let me play devil's advocate here. If I am reading a book that hits 98% suspense during a high-stakes infiltration, won't my brain just get absolute whiplash when the plot suddenly downshifts below 60% for, like, a family sequence?
You'd think so, yeah.
It's like being on a roller coaster that suddenly turns into a scenic train ride. It feels like those drops would kill the momentum.
Well, the analysts argue those drops are actually the novel's defining feature. It's not a flaw. It comes down to the actual psychology of tension and cognitive fatigue.
Okay, how so?
If your heart is constantly beating at 160 beats per minute, your brain eventually habituates to the stress.
Oh.
The amygdala just stops responding to the stimuli. You get numb to the action. Jawhar uses those low-suspense domestic chapters, specifically chapters 4, 13, and 16, to force a physiological reset.
So you have to lower the baseline so the spikes actually feel like spikes again?
Exactly. You earn the 90% chapters by resting in the 40% chapters. And it demands a very specific stylistic approach. The report actually notes a 35% stylistic influence from John le Carre in these sections.
Oh, that makes sense. The slow burn.
Right. It favors methodical pacing and human consequences over pure adrenaline. By spending time in that 12% domestic drama space, The thriller mechanics are given actual human stakes.
Yeah, you aren't just watching an action film run through a maze.
Exactly.
You are watching a man whose family is waiting for him at home.
Which makes the danger feel real.
And that grounding in reality is crucial when we look at the inciting incident, because to understand how the book eventually hits those massive suspense peaks, we really have to look at what kicks the whole plot into motion.
The origin story.
Yeah, it stems from a completely original take on one of the oldest sci-fi tropes in existence, which is invisibility. And the metrics here are staggering. The origin of the invisibility scores a 9.5 out of 10 for originality.
And that's because the author completely abandons the standard origin story frameworks. Like, there is no radioactive spider.
Right.
There is no high-tech military cloaking suit. And it isn't cast as some magical fantasy spell. It is presented as an archaeological mystery.
It's just so weird.
It is. The protagonist, a man named Gus, simply eats a luminous fruit that he discovers inside an Egyptian cave.
Okay, let's unpack this for a second. A guy eats a glowing piece of fruit from a cave.
Yeah.
How does that not instantly ruin the high-stakes realism we just talked about? How does this not instantly turn into a comic book or a fantasy novel? We just talked about John le Carre and grounded geopolitical tension, and now we've got magic cave fruit.
It seems totally contradictory, I know. But the answer lies in how the human brain processes impossible information. The report cites a 40% Kafka manifestation in how this event is handled.
Kafka again.
Yeah. Jawhar takes this supernatural conceit and he aggressively makes it mundane. The report gives the book a metaphor density of 8 out of 10, noting that the invisibility is treated strictly as a ghost as condition.
So it's an affliction.
Exactly. It is never once framed as a superpower.
He strips all the glamour away from it.
Completely. And the author grounds the impossible using hyper-specific sensory details, particularly focusing on olfactory descriptions.
Smells.
Right. Gus is a perfume shop owner. The text describes the world through top notes and base notes, the exact smell of a room or a person like their perfume.
Oh, that's clever.
It is, because scent bypasses the logical centers of the brain and taps directly into the limbic system. By focusing your attention on these deeply tactile, mundane sensory inputs, the brain is tricked into accepting the supernatural premise.
It feels real because it smells real.
Exactly. It's not about being a superhero. The invisibility triggers an existential crisis, serving as a literal lens to examine solitude and identity.
Okay, so if the invisibility is this existential condition, what does it actually do to the human mind? Because once Gus is thrust into that profound isolation, we get to see his character arc. And looking at the metrics, his progression is incredibly unsettling for the reader.
It's a steep drop.
The analysts call his descent uniquely credible.
Well, he begins as, just a perfectly normal perfume shop owner. But once he realizes he cannot be seen, all the moral guardrails just vanish.
Yeah.
He devolves into a voyeur first. He becomes deeply obsessed with a character named Lisa.
Just watching her.
Just watching. And from there, he escalates to vigilantism. He crosses paths with a trafficked girl whom he decides to save.
Yeah.
But eventually, that protective violence hardens, and he becomes an outright assassin.
And we experience every single step of that descent through his own perspective. The narrative voice is first person, but the analysts only give it a 7 out of 10 for reliability.
Because he's losing it.
Right. Over the 45-month time span of the novel, the accumulation of trauma fundamentally fractures his worldview. The thematic analysis tracks the theme of moral decay and redemption as being present in 76% of the chapters.
And that review, included in the source material, it distills the entire psychological premise down to a single question. What do we become when no one can see us?
Think about it. If you knew you couldn't be seen, what rules would you stop following? It reminds me of Plato's Ring of Gyges.
Oh, yeah, the thought experiment.
Yeah, this ancient philosophical thought experiment that asks whether a person is only just because they are afraid of getting caught. Like, if you give someone a ring that makes them invisible, will even the most virtuous person inevitably turn into a thief or a murderer?
Because anonymity breeds moral decay.
Exactly. It removes the societal mirror. If no one can see you, you don't have to look at yourself. But I have to ask, based on the data, is Gus actually a hero, or are we just trapped in the head of a villain?
That's the brilliance of Jawhar's moral accounting, which actually earns the book a 9.5 out of 10 for moral complexity. Gus is never purely a villain, nor is he ever purely a hero.
He's somewhere in the middle.
Yeah, the reader is forced to do this moral arithmetic. He is a voyeur invading people's most private spaces, yes, but he's also a killer targeting truly bad people.
Right.
And he's a fiercely dedicated protector of his family, particularly his wife. He's all of these things simultaneously.
So as a reader, you are just forced into complicity. You are trapped inside the head of a man who is actively justifying his own moral rot because he feels he is serving a higher purpose.
And because he is saving people, you catch yourself rooting for him.
Even as he crosses absolute moral lines.
Which is so uncomfortable. But once Gus crosses those personal moral lines, the scope of the damage just multiplies. He's just watching his neighbors and he starts looking at global systems.
The escalation.
Right. The novel takes his isolated psychological descent and drops it into a massive, terrifying global arena. The scale of the domestic drama transitions seamlessly into the 22% political thriller mechanics.
And the conspiracy architecture Jawhar builds here is incredibly provocative. The report outlines the concepts Gus uncovers.
It's heavy stuff.
It is. And just to pause for a second, a strict reminder for everyone listening. We are neutrally reporting on the fictional architecture of the novel's plot here.
Right, absolutely.
We are not endorsing or taking sides on any of these politically real-world conspiracy theories. We are just looking at the source material.
Exactly. We're looking at how Jawhar leverages these highly charged real-world theories strictly as world-building tools. The report analyzes how tapping into existing cultural paranoias immediately establishes a terrifying fictional atmosphere of institutional corruption.
It sets a mood.
Yeah, the author uses these recognizable flashpoints to build a world where systemic rot is so deep that Gus's personal moral failings almost seem justified by comparison.
Because within the fiction of the novel, Gus is navigating a terrifying system of global manipulation. And this geopolitical tension peaks in Chapter 17, which the metrics flag as the longest sequence in the book.
It's a massive chapter.
It is a meticulously researched infiltration of the Pentagon. The report explicitly says it rivals Frederick Forsyth for procedural purity.
And that intense procedural detail is what keeps the wilder conspiracy elements from just flying off the rails. The analysts note a 20% Tom Clancy influence providing that technical military precision, which is then layered over a 15% Don influence that focuses on conspiracy as an almost overwhelming systemic force. So Gus is operating at the absolute peak of his abilities in the most secure facility on the planet.
But then Jawhar pulls the rug out. Here's where it gets really interesting. You have this massive buildup. Gus is buried deep in this geopolitical crisis. And then the ultimate twist hits.
A failure.
The invisibility fails right at the climax.
Yeah, the analyst gave this structural choice a rare 10 out of 10 for originality.
I mean, losing the invisibility at the climax, that is like a skydiver pulling the parachute cord and getting a handful of confetti.
That's exactly what it feels like.
Why strip the protagonist of his only advantage at the worst possible moment? You have a character who has developed a massive complex because he can move through the world untouchable.
Because the invisibility had become a crutch, it allowed Gus to bypass the human experience entirely. When it fails, he is instantly mortal again. He is entirely vulnerable. The thematic tracking shows the theme of technology versus humanity peaking right here, appearing in 27% of the chapters.
And once he is visible, the genre mechanics violently shift again, right?
Yes. The book drops the political espionage and becomes a gritty, stripped-down survival story. The report actually cites a 15% Cormac McCarthy influence taking over the prose.
Wow, McCarthy.
Yeah. Gus no longer has the luxury he just has to survive the physical reality of the room he is in.
Okay, so you have a globally compromised, morally shattered protagonist. He just lost his supernatural advantage in the middle of a massive geopolitical crisis, and he is fighting for his life. How does the author possibly land this plane? The mechanics of wrapping up a story with that much accumulated tension seem impossible.
Well, according to the metrics, the genius of the book is that Jawhar refuses to land the plane.
He just doesn't do it. The ending metrics are incredibly divisive. The conclusion scores a 9.0 for literary merit, but it only gets a 7.5 for thriller convention.
And the primary reason for that lower thriller score is the absolute lack of a clean resolution. Thriller audiences are traditionally conditioned to expect a return to the status quo,
Sure, you expect the rogue agent to neutralize the threat, clear his name, and restore order.
Exactly. Jawhar explicitly denies the reader that catharsis.
Gus doesn't get a parade. He's just left in an alley. His wife is still completely in the dark about what he has become and the atrocities he has committed.
But then the report highlights the ultimate open thread. A twist that scores a 9.5 for originality.
The Giza guy.
Yes. This is the haunting ambiguity that just elevates the entire novel.
And the book twists the knife by including a 1,200-word epilogue.
There's an apex predator operating completely unaccounted for.
Okay, but I have to ask, does an ending that leaves everything unresolved, leaving the protagonist stranded and the main threat out there, does that actually satisfy the reader? Or does it just feel like sequel bait? It sounds a bit like a post-credit scene trying to sell you the next hardcover.
I mean, it is a valid frustration, and it explains its 7.5 thriller convention score. But the review, included in the report, provides some really essential context here.
What do they say?
They argue that while this ending will infuriate readers looking for pure adrenaline and a neatly tied bow, it deeply rewards patient readers who want suspense layered with philosophical meaning. If the plot was neatly resolved, the tension dissipates. By leaving it open, Jawhar leaves the reader with a lingering, infectious sense of paranoia.
And a massive part of the book's uniqueness, the market gap analysis points out, is its cultural perspective. You have a Middle Eastern protagonist and an Arab authorial voice operating in a genre that is traditionally overwhelmingly dominated by Western perspectives.
Right. The report projects that 40% of the demographic will be international readers. And this non-Western lens completely changes how the themes of systemic corruption and global intervention are framed.
How so?
Well, in a traditional Western thriller, think of a Clancy or Brad Thor novel, the underlying assumption is that the system is fundamentally good.
Yeah. And the hero just needs to root out a few bad actors to restore justice.
Yes, exactly. But Jawhar's Middle Eastern perspective operates on a much more cynical baseline. The system itself is broken. Order cannot be restored because true order never existed. Gus's lack of a triumphant return home reflects a geopolitical reality where survival, not victory, is the only realistic outcome.
So even with the inclusion of glowing cave fruit, it is a profoundly more realistic worldview. The supernatural element isn't there to provide cheap escapism. It is a tool used to explore very real, very human vulnerabilities.
It proves that the most effective tropes are the ones that serve as mirrors. The invisibility in The Man Who Vanished isn't a cheap narrative trick. It is a diagnostic tool for human morality.
It really is. Bringing it all back together for you listening, this metrics report proves something vital about storytelling. The Man Who Vanished proves that you don't have to choose between high-octane, heart-pounding mechanics and deep existential dread of literary fiction.
You can have both.
You can merge the procedural tension of a Pentagon infiltration with the philosophical weight of Kafka, and you can map it all out on a spreadsheet. It uses invisibility to reflect our own moral decay, asking the hard questions about who we really are in the dark, and it leaves you sitting with the discomfort of your own answers.
And the data shows that Gus ultimately failed his moral test. The anonymity corrupted him.
We know Gus failed. But I want to leave you with a final thought to mull over on your own. Take Gus out of the equation and put yourself in that position. If that luminous fruit was sitting on your kitchen counter right now, knowing everything you know about human nature, the ring of gauges, and the seductive pull of anonymity...
Would you have the restraint to leave it uneaten?
Exactly. And if you did take a bite and you watched your hand slowly fade away into nothing, what would your first undocumented hour actually look like?
That is the exact question this entire literary architecture was engineered to make you ask.
Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. We respect your time, and we love that you're here exploring these blueprints with us. Keep questioning the narratives around you, and we'll catch you on the next one.